Hi guys. Today I would like to share with you the process that is necessary to create the warp before it goes on to the loom. So this is a horizontal warping mill. As you can see, it rotates horizontally. It used to be a vertical mill. That's why it's kind of a little off balance and it will roll on itself. Um, because it's not really weighted properly for a smooth horizontal. But that's okay. It works just fine. My husband and my sons converted it for me by taking it off its vertical stand and replacing the bar so that we could use all thread. And that way, these pieces and this piece can come off the stand and they collapse, and then the stand itself can come apart enough to collapse. So it folds up nice and fairly neat so that I can find a storage spot for it, because right now there isn't a good one. But that's okay. We will find it. At least it collapses down even more than it did while it was a vertical. These pegs on the ends are used to create the cross. You can put a cross at either the first end or both ends. And that cross, as we've talked about as I warped the loom, is important for being able to track which threads come next so that when you lay out your warp in the loom, it's nice and even. It prevents tangles and that sort of thing. So let's get started. The first thing I need to do is figure out how long my warp is going to be. So I'm going to take this stick and I'm going to take my pattern, and my pattern says for one set of 4 placemats, it would be 3.5 yards. So for 8 placemats, like I'd like to do, it's 7 yards. But I'm thinking, given the waist on my loom, I might need to go to either 7.25 or 7.5. So the first thing I have to remember is how many inches are in a quarter of a yard. And unfortunately, my phone is busy. So I have to do that manually. So 36 divided by 4. Let's see, 20 is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 inches. So if I go to 9 inches for 7.25, I don't know how much loom waste they accounted for. I'm going to go to 7.5. I've got plenty of yarn to do that with for this. I made sure to have more than enough. 2,200 plus 850 times 2 is 1,600, 1,700. So 2,200 plus 1,700, and I've got 8,200 yards. Yeah, I've got plenty. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a 7.5 yard warp, and then hopefully at the end I'll get a good sample to put at in my book. But I am following a commercial pattern. This is one of the first times I've ever done this way, and it's called a monk's belt, and that's what the placemats will look like roughly, because my colors are just slightly different. And this is the color of my warp and part of the weft. So I've got plenty there. I've got 2 of these. So the first thing is to measure out a guide string. So to measure my guide string, the first thing I'm going to do is create a loop in the end. Let's see if I can tie this better than I did yesterday. Yay, I did pretty good. All right, now I'm going to attach this to one end of the yardstick. I'm going to wrap it around 7 times. I want to end up on this end. So I'm going to start at the far end and warp and wrap it that way. And let's put this down here. I'm using my Lazy Kate to hold this from rolling around. I'll do the same with the cones. And I'll try to do this in camera. I know I'm off camera at the moment. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, the back has it marked quarter, half. 7 and a half. And that's where I'm going to create my loop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of fold it over. Tie a loop in the end because I've got to be able to loop it over the pegs. So I need it as close to 7 yards as possible. All right. And now grab my scissors. Make sure I'm cutting the one that's attached to the ball. I'm going to cut it just a couple inches from that knot. And there's my guide string. That guide string will tell me where I need to wind the warp on the mill to get 7.5 yards. And I have some tricks up my sleeve to cut down the loom waste that I got on my loom. So we are good there. All right, so I like to start on the right hand side. So I'm going to start with these pegs here. My top peg is going to be the top of my cross. I'm going to come to the outside of my pegs, and then I'm going to start winding I could probably manage about a 12-yard warp on this. I don't think I could do much more than that without it being too close, unless there was only a very few ends. My knot's actually sliding. And I'm going to have to shift somehow because my pegs. Okay. Can't quite get it to that peg. It's going to be a little too tight. So, but it's a little too long there. So can I shift this? I don't know that I can get it all the way around that peg. could would be great, because that means that I'd actually get maybe just a little bit more than 7.5. But to go backwards, this is my challenge. Can I get it to stretch? I really can't, no matter what I do. And if I get these too close, then I can't get the right number of ends. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to add to this loop a little bit longer thread so that I can make it that, I mean, it's there, right? It's just, I can't quite get it over the end of the peg. So I'm just going to add enough to tie it to this peg. And that will give me my 7.5 yards. And all I'm using here is just crochet cotton. It's old stuff that was used for a project a long time ago, and I had lots of leftovers, so there we go. That's how that goes. My knot's wanting to slide on me, which is another factor here that's giving me issues. Now, I don't know if a real weaver would do it this way, but this is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to tie it in a bow and call her good. All right, so now that I've got my guide string on there, kind of shift it just a little in places. All right, now I need to open these warp yarns. Probably should have done that before now, but you know, trying to keep them clean until I could get to this. I'll set that one down, and I am going to run 2 ends at a time. It will cut down the number of times that I need to go back and forth, because 1 at a time gets pretty lengthy in some cases. And this one is, let me double check. It's on the 2nd page. And I do have this in a sheet protector. I put all of my stuff in a sheet protector, and then I end up putting it in a notebook when I'm all done. And where is winding the warp? 3.5 yards for 314 ends. So I need 314 threads. And each time I go down to the end of the guide string is 1. Actually, it will be 2 because I'm running 2 threads at the same time. So down and back will be 4. As a result, I will be tying at every 12 warp ends. No, 20 warp ends. That'll be nice and easy math-wise. So I do need another one of these up. And this is just my Lazy Kate. I have found it works really great for holding my warps, my warp cones. I use it to hold the whatever that I'm winding off for bobbins as well. Where's the end on this one? Come out, wherever you are. Well, there we go. And yep, they're going the same direction. All right, that's good. So I'm going to take 2 ends and I'm going to create the same kind of loop I did at the beginning of the last one. I am going to start away from the cross. That way my cross doesn't have any cuts in it if I can avoid it. If you have knots anywhere along the line, that could change things. But hopefully this is good enough yarn that I won't run into any knots. Okay, so I'm just tying the 2 together in a loop, and I'm going to wrap it on this peg. Okay, now I'm just going to very carefully, and I'm trying to do this with the wrong hand. I'm following that guide string. I think I'm going to have to move that. It's too far underneath, which means it's catching. And that means my threads are kind of loosening. There we go. You want it taut, but not tight. And I'm just wrapping it around, following that guide string all the way up. Now, when I get to here, put that at the top where I think you can see it, I'm going to come to the outside of the first peg, inside of the second and third peg, and around the top, going slowly means I'm losing control. I'm going to wrap it around the top one. I'm going to come back down the outside of those 2 and then to the inside of this third. What that does is it creates a cross right here. This is the cross, okay? So every time I've got a cross, I know I have 4 threads in that cross. And the first 2 and the second 2 are separated. And that's how you get the cross for your warp. Now I have to do this 314 times. Actually, divide that by 2 because every time down and back is 4. So I'm just going to follow that down. One of the lovely things about this new horizontal mill is it's much easier on my back and my shoulders. I'm sitting a little cockeyed here, so I'm going to shoot over just a little bit. I'm having to hold on to it a little bit because it wants to roll against me. All right, now I'm going to come down to the outside of this peg and start back up. And now that's 4. And I'm going to be doing a bunch of counting, so I'm probably going to pretty much quit talking, and I'll probably end up speeding this up in post-production, but come along for the ride. Probably should have been keeping my finger in between those two. It'll work out in the wash. No, I'm going to go back to the beginning and fix that because I am concerned about tangles. I was taught to make very sure that you lay your threads side by side as you do this, but I've learned since that it's not quite as important to keep them exactly side by side, except where you're carrying these two together, because those aren't going to get untangled in the cross the same way that each cross separation does. So I need to shift how I'm doing this. And yes, I know this is kind of crazy. Let's hope it doesn't tangle as I pull it back up. But I think if I've just let it fall, which I have, it should be okay. All right, I'm back to the beginning. I'm going to shift my body a little bit, make it a little more centered. And it fell off. There's my loop. Now what I'm going to do is just put my finger in between the two threads. And that should help. Just kind of bringing them back together with my thumb. I am having to use both hands to work this because it wants to roll away from me. Which is a little harder, I suppose. But it certainly beats the bending up and down that I used to do to make this happen on the vertical. Oops, stepping on it. Again, outside, inside, inside, outside, outside, inside. And that brings you back at the right location here. And I did develop a little bit of a tangle here. I was a little concerned about that. but it's not so bad that I can't fix it. It's just going to take me a second. Just don't want to pull it into a knot here. There we go. Put my finger back in between there. And off we go. Well, I thought off we go. Got a little tangle here, and it's just kind of the way I did that means that my cones are wrapped around each other here. So I am stopping for a second and just kind of unwrapping here. There we go. I don't know if you can even see the cones. It is one of the problems with trying to film this way. There we go. Now my cones are, oops. No, I still have one little twist in there. Well, half twist. There we go. Now I got them. Okay, that should be 20 threads because I've counted 10 times. That's up is 1, down is 2. Up is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Although I count every time I get to here, and I count 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to this third peg, and I'm going to just kind of wrap this around here for a second. And I'm going to come back up here, and I am going to, well, I can't really do it as easily here as I thought. If you counted it across, it's a little easier, but I'm going to count it on this end since that's where I'm at. I'm going to take another piece of this green because it's nice and visible against the rusty brown here, brick color. And I'm going to count these threads, and then I'm going to wrap them so that I know that this is 20. That's 20. So I'm going to wrap it. Now I'm not going to tie a knot in it because I want to be able to take it off fairly easily later. But I'm going to just not capturing the guide thread. I'm just going to tie around these. Tumble fingers here. And what I'm going to do is what they call a surgeon's knot, where you just wrap it twice, because that'll be pretty secure. And then I'm going to kind of come down and wrap that. Well, it's not going to stay there. It's going to float around. And just secure it there. All right, now I can start my next 20. I think I'm going to take a break, stop the camera, and we'll come back when I have my 314 ends. That way you don't have to sit here and watch me count to 314 by 20s. See you at the other end. I'm back. I now have 314 ends. That's 314 individual strings or threads for this warp. If you remember correctly, I started on this end, but 314 is not divisible by 4, so I had to end on this end. That's okay, not a big deal. But now the next thing I have to do is protect my cross and protect my warp from getting too messed up in the process of taking it off the mill. So I have to tie some threads around it to protect it. And I'm just going to use the same green thread, and because it'll be a good contrasting color, resting that on my knees so that it'll not roll around on me. And I'm going to be cutting a few of these as we go, but I'll just do them as I go. So, number 1, protect the cross. So there's a couple ways I can do that. I can either tie individually on these sides, or I can tie right around the cross. I'm going to see if I can tie around the cross. So first I've got to get under all of these threads. Make sure I've got absolutely every one of them. And underneath all of these threads, hope you can see that. So I'm talking about all of these threads and then all of these threads. Okay, now that I've got it in there, I'm checking. Do I actually have it around all of this one side? And I do. I've got it separating this point here and this point here. And I'm going to tie that pretty good. Now, it doesn't have to be tight. It just has to be secured. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie it like that so I can just pull that one loop out, but that should be pretty secure. And now I'm going to tie up here the same way to keep these straight. And I'm also being careful not to catch the guide string, right? Because you don't want to catch that guide string. All right. Now as I work my way to the other end, I'm going to tie what we call choke ties. That's where you get certain spots and you wrap around and you tie it tightly so that those strands stay relatively in order. It doesn't have to be done real often, but I am going to do it several times on this one, seeing as it's a longer warp. And again, I want to make sure I don't catch this guide string. You want it to stay separate from the rest. You don't want it to get hooked in. Now in this particular case, I want this to be tight. So I'm going to use what is called a surgeon's knot. And basically you just left over right, left over right, and pull tight. Now to keep that tight, because it's not going to stay tight like that, I'm going to come around a second time, pull tight. That's why it's called a choke tie. You want it tight. Left over right, pull it tight. And then just to be certain it won't come undone, I'm going to tie a bow. So that's a choke tie. Notice it pulls everything in tight. And I'm just going to tie 2 or 3 of them. I'm not going to tie a lot. They don't, doesn't have to be like everywhere. That guide string does tend to get in the way a little bit. The reason this surgeon's knot isn't working real great is this crochet cotton is quite slick, and so it slides on itself, and that's why I'm having to do the extra bow on those to keep them tight. You don't always have to do that with surgeon's knot if there's any kind of stickiness to the yarn. All right. No, I think I'm going to do one last one here, and then I'll show you what I've got down here. You do want this to be something that you can get untied fairly simply later. So you don't want it to be a knot that you have to cut apart, because cutting it is not a good thing. All right, now you'll see these threads here. These are the threads I've added as I went along to keep track of my count. And basically, I'm going to go ahead and untie that because I won't need it anymore. What I've done is I've counted by 20s, then wrapped by hundreds, so that I had 1, 2, 300, and then my final 14. But this can come out now because I really don't need it, and I'll use it to tie off my final end. I could leave it and just do another one, but it might as well come off now because it'll be easier now than later. And yes, this is kind of a nitpicky way for me to do it. There's an easier way to do it at the cross, but I was being crazy, so this is the way I did it. And I must have counted every single one of these threads probably 4 or 5 times just to make sure that I got it right. It's actually a good thing I use crochet cotton because it is rather slick against this other mercerized cotton. That's just the end where I have my loop tie. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie this loop a little tighter than I expected. And I'm probably going to have to loosen this and move it in order to get enough distance or looseness to do that. That many ends, like I said, taut, not tight. Well, they like to tighten up on their own. Normally, I would have wanted this further down, but as I said when we started this process, it really didn't fit that way. Maybe if I'd have done fewer loops or whatever. And of course, I'm having to try to miss that guide string again. All right, got that through. And again, this one's not a choke tie. This is just keeping my loop open. That's all it's doing. Okay? All right. Normally I would not do this way, but like I said, it got a little tight. All right. So Now I've got my loop, and I'm going to do a crochet chain up the warp, trying to keep a little bit of tension on it. Doesn't have to be a ton of tension. That's another difference between, some methods and others. And you may be able to see I'm using my knee to stop that from rolling. Oops, I'm grabbing the guide string here. I don't want to grab the guide string. And I know what I'm doing is off camera. When I get closer to the top, I'll be able to get it in camera. Well, here, I'm just putting it around my wrist, grabbing the next piece, pulling it through. And I keep on going. You do want to make sure you're not twisting that as you go through. But as long as I pull my hand out and grab from the top, I know that I'm not twisting my warp. Okay, again, I have my cross. I'm going to go ahead and pull this off. I'm going to pull this last one through, and I'm going to grab the loop at the very top and that last final loop. And with my guide string, I'm going to just kind of fold it up and tie those together. It's a long guide string, so I'm having to get a hold of it. Where is it at? Oh, it's still stuck here. That's why. Okay. Okay, so I've just kind of folded it into quarters. It's still pretty long, but I'm going to pull it through those 2 loops, and just kind of pull it through like that. And now they're held together. So now my chain will not fall apart. I can hang it on a peg on the wall. I can find a place to hang it until I'm ready to put it on the loom. And that is making a warp. Have a good day.